Yeah, response video to holiday. Yeah, just another example of, he's just so dishonest. There's no way you could, I mean, I've been over this particle theory of gravity so many times, and to pretend as if, to misparaphrase it the way he's going to do, it's just, like I said, a liar. He's just a liar.
There's three mods that you can think about, but it's elastic bands or springs, and if you either whichever way you pick, and you could intermingle them theoretically, but it's equally convoluted.
His argument is that gravity, everybody's theory relies on some sort of pulling force or spring force to push things apart. And that's just nonsense. I mean, obviously the argument being made is that there's a pressure on the outside of things that push them together, and that the pressure is being created by photons hitting the subjects, and that the subjects cast shadows on each other from that photonic pressure. Pressure would only work if it had straight lines, right? So yeah, I mean, if it's a medium, if space was it just could fill the void and there'd be no extra pressure here. The only way you create extra pressure here is that there is no ability for the pressure to change its trajectory. It's all straight lines, and straight lines will create the inverse square that suits gravity. And let's remember that gravity, all these attractive and repulsive forces, let's remember they happen at the speed of light. It's not a coincidence that they just happen, those forces happen to function at the speed of light. It's because they're made out of photons, gravitons. Photons that are different. I mean, again, so I'll explain, there's a difference. I've tried to point out this difference, but you just don't want to hear the difference. But what happens when electrons interact with regular photons is they're interacting with the frequency of the photons. Obviously, electrons do a different thing depending on the frequency. If the frequency is high enough, the electron doesn't pay any attention. If it's the right frequency, the electron hits a tipping point, so to speak, and reacts, absorbs the photon and readmits it. Okay? But it has to be at the right frequency. So again, it's a tipping point argument. So two photons hit quickly enough, they knock the thing over. It's that kind of tension argument. And the gravitons aren't doing that. They're affecting it in a different, they're affecting electrons in a different way. There's a different mechanism of transferring just directional information, not actually being absorbed and readmitted. It's a different mechanism because it's a different thing, because it has the difference of frequency, and frequency is fundamentally important.
You end up in a philosophical problem of having to explain the pushing of springs in terms of pushing of springs.
So again, he's telling me what I'm forced to. This is the only way you can think about it. Well, obviously you can think about it without springs or rubber bands. It's just bullshit to tell people that's the only way they can explain a force. Yeah, they can explain the force as being a force, a thing, an actual thing, an actual mechanism.
Informational point of view, you can actually you could say this is the third of a trichotomy, perhaps, is that particle A somehow gives a message to particle B just to go in a different direction, and that would be a pure.
Yeah, right. And so he thinks this message can be sent instantaneously, not at the speed of light, even though all these forces function at the speed of light, all the real forces. And so again, entanglement is far from a proven reality, and certainly it has this huge obstacle that once you create entanglement, you can't just create some catch that says, oh yeah, it's traveling faster than the speed of light, but we can't somehow access that information. That sounds like a convenient evasion of having to deal with the real problems created by any kind of notion of instantaneous communication.
Like informational outlook. And I think that's the most neutral outlook without prejudice.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, this, you think based on what? Again, the most neutral to what? It's, you know, it's either a theory is consistent with the evidence or it's not. Obviously, you can, if you're going to say that blue unicorns create gravity, well, yeah, I can't disprove blue unicorns. But if somebody's arguing that it's a photonic pressure, well, then you can disprove it, because it's going to have to fit all of the scenarios, and it can't rely on some sort of magic. Where unicorns have magic powers. They can travel faster than the speed of light. They can push things. They can do this. They can do anything. I can make a unicorn into a god. I can't make a fucking graviton into God.
It's in a particular form of mechanics and mechanism, and I think it's probably the best we're ever going to be able to do.
Yeah, based on nothing. Well, fine. It's the best you're going to be able to do. I'm telling you that no, you're you know, hopefully I can prove you wrong before you're dead, and just, you know, pretty much mock you for this nothing statement you're making about what's possible or what's likely. The explanation's right there. It's been right in front of us for 200 years. The theory was first proposed. It's been sitting right there, and it's only because people casually and recklessly and sloppily dismissed it that it's not the theory. Because it's the truth. It's the one that's correct.
I don't think we can actually assert any conclusion from that, but it does lead one's mind to think of the universe as a computational machinery.
Yeah, whatever that means. Computation through what mechanism? Again, what's the point of saying it's a computational machine that exchanges information through invisible process, magical process? Unicorns jump from photon to photon and tell them what to do. I mean, you're just making up a force. I'm explaining the force.
And when you do that, and you understand the analogies between the computational machinery we have, a lot of strange phenomena are completely unstrange. Action at distance.
I don't know how any of those become unstrange. I just don't. Unless you're going to accept this idea that there's something like faster than light communication, and it's just that can't have any impact on the real universe. So it's communicating faster than light, but it doesn't do anything that we could ever test it on. It'll evade every test we create for that communication. That sounds like just an absolute crock of shit.
Being in two places at the same time, or having uncertain states until you measure them. This could all be very easily, without paradox, implemented.
Yeah, so very easily without paradox. You're going to create something that's simultaneously in two different places, and you're going to say this is without paradox. I mean, I just call bullshit all over the place. Bullshit.
By a computer system.
Yeah, computers can't do that. Computers can't they can't be in two places at once. So the electricity in the computer can't be in two places at once. It can't do two processes at once.
And that isn't to say we are a computer system. The point is it's just an observation. And so
yeah, an observation that means absolutely nothing. You said this is some sort of neutral position or some sort of safe position or some sort of rational position. It's not rational, it's not safe, and it's not coherent. And it's merely a contrivance to placate completely unevidentiary phenomenon, a phenomenon that hasn't even been proven to exist.
Kind of the criticism of Mendele's physics is, yeah, if everything's colliding, you're saying that you're going with the spring mechanism.
Well, I say again, I mean, that's a fair cop paraphrase. Everything's colliding has to do with springs. It has to do with photons. It has to do with everything that is. The bits, the discretest bits, are all the same bits. They're moving the speed of light. The only thing they have is polarization, so they can have a shape, and they're either a frisbee going this way or a frisbee going that way. But that's it. They're a frisbee. They go one speed. They go in straight lines from point A to point B, and they only do something else if they interact with under specific circumstances. They have to hit the other frisbees the right way, certain ways, or no way at all. That's too complex for you? There's no springs. There's no other mechanisms. There's no rubber bands. There's no nothing. There's a reasonable kinetics. Just purely rational kinetics. It's moving this way. It collides with something. The something moves another way because of the collision, and it moves another way because of the collision, and everything is conserved. No energy is transferred. All that's transferred is direction. You can't understand an exchange in direction. Both things leave the speed of light. Both things leave intact. Their polarization might be changed, but otherwise they're the same thing they were when they got there, and the only thing that's different is they're both going in a different direction now. You can't understand how that's a non-energetic interaction, that no energy is released in that interaction, and that when photons of a frequency interact with an electron, there is a release, there is a conversion of the energy. The infrared radiation goes in, the ultraviolet comes out, or vice versa. You can't understand the difference?
Everything's pushing, and you've said this forcefully, and I'd just say, yeah, everybody who engages in physics has to take some kind of belief stand and bet on the conviction, so to speak.
Well, whatever. It's not a belief stand. It's an observation that it fits. It fits the evidence. Again, it explains time dilation. It's applicable to the speed of magnetic flux. It's applicable to the speed of electrical flux. It explains all of it. And you're just sitting there saying somehow, no, it doesn't. I say so.
I think realizing this, there are levels of conviction and faith in one's insights and guesses to how reality works. There are levels of faith.
Again, it's just such an insult. I'm not playing a faith game, asshole. I'm saying the evidence is there. It points to it. Gravity points to it. The straight lineness of photons is made evident in the inverse square rule. That's why there is an inverse square rule, is because pressure can be differentiated because it can't fill the gaps. I mean, the evidence supports the theory, and you're not giving me any reason why the theory is not supported by the evidence. You're not showing me a piece of evidence that says this doesn't support a photonic explanation.
Like some are propped up by more beliefs than you might imagine.
Yeah, whatever that means. Again, this is not about beliefs, it's about evidence, and it's about continuity with evidence. And the argument being made is that the only reason why this theory was discounted 200 years ago is because they didn't know the speed of light, and they didn't have a non-friction, empty space model of the nuclear mechanism. So they couldn't explain away why there's no heat and why there's no opposition to velocity. But the opposition to velocity can be understood if you just understand the mechanics of what takes place when you have a school of fish doing a pattern. You force the school of fish to move, or it moves. It's inclined to move. It moves because more fish start swimming in that direction, and if more fish are swimming that way, then fewer fish are left to do this. So this has to slow down. Not complicated.
So those beliefs, in my opinion...
And I don't mean slow down because the fish are going slower. I mean fewer fish will be doing it so it doesn't get done as fast. It's like making a brick wall. If there's fewer fish over here making this brick wall because more of the fish are over here making this brick wall, well, that's, yeah, the brick wall is going to be made slower. The fish are working just as fast. It just gets done slower because fewer fish are doing it. That's the point of the idea of momentum. And what happens is now the fish are moving in a direction. There's no opposition to that net direction, and there's less ability to convert fish because there's less fish at the other brick wall working.
I mean, it's all about getting the minimum number of acceptable beliefs down to a minimum.
Yeah, whatever that means. Again, this whole I'm just so sick of you people. I mean, you know, you and Piero and your your trite, insulting paraphrases. I mean, really, Perrault calling it poetry when it's just being as explicit as possible. There's no poetry anywhere near it. And then you're just playing this game as if it's based on some sort of faith notion. Faith in what? Faith in kinetic reality? Faith in that, you know, the kinetic toys you have? Wait, is it faith that makes you understand that that's how they function? It's faith?
So the way this works for, as I've tried to explain, fields, you can have two particles interacting by a particle exchange, and are we saying this is the piece of paper that informs, or are we saying the particle exchange is a forceful, springful collision telling it? I'm not sure of this. In the Feynman diagrams, Mendham says that Feynman diagrams explain directional information exchange, but Feynman diagrams work in a conservative physics, standard physics.
Yeah, well, like I said, this is conservative too, but again, you're just discounting the argument. The argument is that photons are a pair of photons with a frequency. Again, things with frequency are going to affect it differently than things without frequency. Okay, X-rays go through substances regular light doesn't go through. And why? Because it has a different frequency. So it's frequency dependent, and it's a different interaction. So when a photon is interacting with an electron, that interaction is going to be different than the interaction between a graviton and an electron. That interaction is just going to exchange, once again, directional information, where the exchange between a photon of ultraviolet light being converted into infrared light is clearly a different kind of exchange. There's more to it. More is exchanged than just direction. Particles are actually exchanged. The electron absorbs particles and the electron emits particles. It's not doing that with gravity. With gravity, whatever goes in comes out, and the only difference is it comes out in a direction and it comes out with a polarization. But that's it. There's no more gravity released or less gravity released.
So therefore, there is also energy conservation information in there. So there's
Yeah, so again, you keep making this implication that I'm somehow not accounting for conservation, and I can't keep saying it more explicitly over and over again, is the same that goes into the interaction is the same thing that comes out, except the direction is changed. Shit, how many times can I say it? How loudly do I have to say it before will you concede the point that there's nothing in my theory that breaks conservation rules?
So in standard physics, there's momentum and velocity information in there.
Well, guess what? There's none of that information with photons. They have no velocity information because it's all running at the speed of light. There is no less than the speed of light. There is no more than the speed of light. There's the speed of light. All of them have the same mass, so mass is irrelevant. The only thing they have is directional information. It's the only thing they can exchange. Unlike photons traveling at a frequency. They have a frequency to be exchanged.
And so the question would be in that model, you know, is how do the springs work? And then you're in this.
So again, he's arguing that I'm somehow suggesting there's a spring between these things pushing them apart. And I'm not arguing that. I'm saying there's a force always pushing things together from the outside, even when there is created a force pulling them together. It's because this object can polarize the photons, and it will create polarized photons that are invisible to this object. But it's still the external pressure is doing the pushing of them together. The only thing you can do is eliminate pressure. You can't create more of it. So all you can do is maximize its pressure. So if these two objects were positively charged, and by nature repugnant. It would be repugnant because what goes in here is what this thing ends up being sensitive. So it goes in one way and it comes out the exact way that's going to be repugnant to this object, and vice versa. What goes in gets converted into the very thing this thing is repugnant to. Not repugnant in any real sense, repugnant in the sense that it's the very thing that it gets pushed by. So essentially it's still a pushing force that would be pushing the two things away, because they're just converting the natural pressure on the outside and magnifying it to the kind of pressure the things are going to be sensitive to. I mean, it's just not that it's always a pushing force.
Constant recursive loop. With fields as an explanation, it's just another articulation and manifestation of the idea of springs between points. Because if a wibble wobble in the field, it requires like a connection between points.
Yeah, well, whatever. It has nothing to do with my theory, so I say bogus to this bullshit. Let's see if it gets anything here.
Inclination into the mix, and it's kind of basically a prejudice based, because we see these kind of things happen.
Yeah, again, this is just so insulting, as if you know, people are going to sit there and make arguments defending a theory, and you're just going to call it something they want to be true and all this other kind of crap, when it seems quite obvious that the standard model, the standard philosophical babble on physics, the standard theorizing, is the stuff made of fantasy.
On the macro scale, so you favour things to continue working that way, and maybe that's a reasonable argument. You know, the idea of when I rub up.
So again, we've been down this road. Somehow you're acting on because it has some intuitional gooiness or friendliness, that's the only reason why you believe it. No, it's not the only reason. It's like evolution. Yeah, I mean, just the idea of it. Somebody could just tell you the story of it, never give you one single fact to defend it, and intuitively you might just get the idea of it. You might think about a chimpanzee, and then you might think about a wolf, and then you might think about all these different animals going down the lineage. You might think about the mammals in the ocean and how they got there. And even with that small amount of evidence, that small amount of thinking, you'd say, yes, this just makes more and more sense. And then you find out that every single rock you uncover, every single bit of evidence you discover, points to this fact of evolution. So come on, this is just such an insulting way to have an argument. You're going to argue this psychology argument. You've got to make a counter argument to the physical structure being proposed, the theory. All right, not the theorizers. I mean, this is just such a dodge.
Strong against the idea of continuity. Maybe the argument for there is continuity is because I see continuity. I don't know.
I don't know what continuity there could possibly be in worlds where you say things are happening simultaneously over a distance, and that the things are communicating faster than the speed of light. Where's the continuity in any of that bubble?
There again, you know, I've made videos on that, about the problems of discrete and discrete and continuous outlooks on the reality of space.
Yeah, whatever that even means. Discrete and blah 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 outlooks on the reality of space. Reality of space. Space doesn't have a reality. The point is that if you think of it as all discrete energy, then it's always had the same energy, and it's just an arrangement of the energy, and that's all you're doing. You're just rearranging the deck chairs and that's all that's happening in the universe, is that the same energy is just being reconfigured into different patterns.
And I find in Mendham actually swaps between points of view. Sometimes you're explicit.
This is again just such a dodge, such a pathetic form of argumentation. If you think I've contradicted myself, obviously that wouldn't be my intention, and you could point out some real contradiction. But there's no real contradiction here. You're just using this as a slander, as another dodge. You're evading the subject by implying that there's some sort of hypocrisy or duplicity somewhere. There's no such thing. You're just playing on words, playing little word games. You petty fuck.
You know, in a vector mechanism, something that sounds very plausible, yet your fundamental principles, based upon your metaphoric fish swimming, it's difficult to see how, in your most recent video, how you made these lines emanating, and that, you know, a few more stronger vectors in this direction. It doesn't very well, the idea, you've not explained how that works in your metaphor.
I did explain it, and I just think, again, you're not even trying. So, I mean, how much effort do I have to put into it, and how much effort is the viewer responsible for? See if I have that drawing. It wasn't the most brilliant piece of stuff, but yeah, I mean, I can redo it quickly enough. So look, the idea is a simple one in terms of understanding direction. Direction, there's a medium line, and direction will be decided by how much stuff is happening on one side versus how much stuff is happening on the other side. And if they have an equal amount of stuff, if the vectors are equal when you add them all up, then the thing stays where it is. But if one line starts to get longer, in the total amount of stuff moving, so this represents all the stuff moving. Well, for this line to get longer, for something to be moving in this direction, that is, the energy is spending more time moving in this direction, so there's more stuff going this way inside of the thing. The only way more stuff can go this way is less stuff has to go this way. So these lines get shorter. So that's the only argument here, is that as you make this vector longer and longer, as your velocity increases, the exposure you have in going the other way, the fish doing the other stuff, besides going this way, become less and less numerous. That's what tips the balance. You can't tip the balance without creating less on one side of the scale. If there's less on the other side of the scale, then obviously there's less for you to convert. There's less possibility to create velocity in the opposite direction because it has less exposure. Velocity has to be destroyed from the top down. It can't be recreated from the bottom up, so to speak. Because that's the nature of its creation. That's why it works. That's why stuff keeps moving in space. Is because the very nature, as soon as it has a velocity, it has a prejudice defending that velocity. And the prejudice is built into the fact that it now has less exposure to create velocity in the opposite direction. So it takes a certain extra force to undo its velocity. But I think it was well enough explained.
Analysis. Not convincingly, anyway.
Well, whatever. Like I said, I think to convince, I'm not really concerned with convincing. What I'm saying is it a plausible explanation of the mechanism? Why it is possible that something can maintain velocity without there being any friction undoing its velocity. And it certainly creates reason to believe it's possible through that understanding that intrinsic in velocity is a prejudice towards velocity. So that's all I need. I don't need you to be convinced. What I need you to do is say that's a plausible explanation that maybe can be picked at further. Maybe you can find some fundamental flaw in it, but fundamentally it's not broken. Fundamentally that could work. That's all I'm looking for. Because once I get enough of these, that could work, that could work, that could work. If we pile up enough of those, you're going to start realizing it's evolution, asshole. And just like evolution, when it comes to physics, it's photons. So his video abruptly ends here, I think. Yeah, I don't know what went wrong there. He cut it out or whatever he did, I don't know. I don't know, then some ending thing. So anyway, whatever. But just another shabby video. Shabby for its paraphrase. Nowhere do I talk about rubber bands or springs in any of my conversation about the mechanism of gravity. I'm talking about raw, kinetic, hard interactions, and that through those interactions, the only thing that exchanges is directional information, because that's the only thing a photon has, really. And I mean a graviton. I mean a single photon, not a photon with frequency. The electromagnetic spectrum is made of photons that have frequency. Gravity doesn't have a frequency. It can't exchange frequency information, so all it can exchange is directional information, and that's it. It can't be absorbed or readmitted. It is just... I can't say it can't be. It quite possibly could be absorbed and readmitted, but it doesn't happen as a matter of process. We don't see stuff gain atomic weight in most circumstances. Could be argued that in some circumstances with certain velocity that there may be an increase in mass, okay, as your velocity substantially increases, but obviously all that mass is pointed in a direction, but I don't need to make an argument about that. I mean, I really don't need to explain if you know 1/1,000,000% of gravity is absorbed through the process or not. It just doesn't matter. Whether electrons are capable of absorbing gravity isn't really necessary to my argument. My argument is that what they primarily do is exchange directional information with gravitons. Alright, that's probably enough. I probably should... there's some crazy guy pretending to be an Indian guy or something. Yeah, I know, it sounds crazy. But yeah, it's happening. Here's my last video. Yeah, here it is. Might as well do this real quick. Because I don't want to play with you, silly person. Yeah, and you're just being a silly person. I mean, it seems obvious he's just a bigoted troll of some kind. You know, pretending to be super Hindu physicist. He has no subscribers. It seems like it's just a troll account. So he asked a question, I answered it respectfully, but that's not good enough for him. And so he added a bunch of other drivel. Let's see, I don't think you have done an honest effort to understand, this guy says to him. Sir, you have misunderstood my interpretation, so I respectfully ask that you allow me to speak direct with the brilliant theorist, Mr. DraftScience uninterrupted. You know, this is what? You're contriving a personality now. So he says nobody's stopping you from speaking. You are okay to think you wish. I am here to converse with scientists in video. Yeah, well, whatever. I don't think you intend to do any such thing. This is what he said, I think. So I said mass is shadowed, not volume, kind of like X-rays. So massive objects would cast darker shadows. Thank you, good sir, for the reply. I did understand from careful review of your excellent presentation that massive objects would block more photon material and cast very dark shadow as we envision it. I don't know what that means, envision it. Yeah, as it's going to be seen through observation. Yeah, that's right. We already know that gravity is mass related. This isn't something I have to argue for. It's already a proven fact, shithead. This unfortunately does not fully explain these observed behaviors to me sufficiently. Well, I don't know what you want. What observed behaviors? While I'm in full agreement that massive objects would cast much darker shadow than, say, a solar system sun, the simple geometry does not appear to add up. Well, that's exactly the point. It does add up. It's the inverse square rule all the way down. There's nothing in my theory that prevents, it explains why gravity is collective, why gravity ends up always having a center of gravity. All right, the center of gravity is a point where all the effects are proportional from each cast shadow. So it would be the point where the shadow is the deepest within a pool of gravity. So it is perfectly explained by a shadow creating a center of gravity. Surely there must be some interaction in geometry of the attracted object and the shadow of another object. Yes, clearly there is, and it's completely consistent with observed fact. Simply stated, even with 100% shadow at 10 kilometers, object casts virtually nothing on the object at even the smallest distances in astronomical scales. Well, again, this doesn't even need to be proven. It was already proven 200 years ago that a particle field traveling at straight lines would perfectly match the inverse square rule. So again, this is not something that needs to be argued. You can say virtually nothing. It's not virtually nothing. Its mass is blocking a certain amount of this shadow effect. You can't block 100% of it because it's a very dense field, as far as we know, 100%. Maybe a black hole could block 100%. Perhaps you could address this most interesting question at some point in your video. It's not an interesting question, actually. It's a really inane, time-wasting question. I have also considered the black hole problem. Well, it's not a problem. The whole reason why there's a limit to how dense a black hole could get, the reason why the universe doesn't create some kind of super black hole, is because there is a limit to the density of gravity. And once you create something so massive, it does block 100% of the shadow. And once it blocks 100% of the shadow, even if it gets really big, it doesn't matter how much more mass it collects, it can't block any more of the shadow. It can't create any darker a shadow. So that's the end of its capacity to create supergravity. It's stuck with just black hole gravity. It can't go to super black hole gravity. I have also considered the black hole problem. However, I will wait in anticipation for a reply. Massive confusing objects around into the equation. Confusing. Introducing another massive and confusing object. I don't see how the object is neither confused nor does it create confusion. Gravity is additive, and the center of gravity isn't centered on any one specific item's gravity. It is a addition of the net effect of all the gravities. So anyway, that's already standard physics, and it's perfectly consistent with what I'm arguing for. And I think you're just being a really weird troll. This is just weird shit, buddy. Anyway, till next time. And such.